What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today we are covering a pretty fascinating story with a pair of fascinating guests and hopefully soon to be a trio of fascinating guests. It is about a newly engaged attorney who is suspected of raping 4 women more than 15 years ago while still a student in Boston. He's now in custody a decade and a half later, thanks in large part, prosecutors and law enforcement authorities say, to investigative genetic genealogy. You'll be hearing that word a lot as we go through it today. And the godmother of that is Barbara Rae-Venter. She is a New Zealand-born American genetic genealogist, biologist, and retired patent attorney, best known as of late for her work helping police and investigators identify Joseph James DeAngelo, also known as the Golden State Killer. In 2019, she was included in the Time 100 list of most influential people, and in 2018 was recognized in Nature's 10, a list of people who mattered in science by the journal Nature. She's also the author of I Know Who You Are, How an Amateur DNA Sleuth Unmasked the Golden State Killer and Changed Crime Fighting Forever. And right on cue is Wendy Murphy. She is an adjunct professor of sexual violence law at New England Law, Boston, where she also co-directs the Women's and Children's Advocacy Project under the Center for Law and Social Responsibility. She is a former visiting scholar at Harvard Law School. Wendy prosecuted child abuse and sex crimes cases for many, many years. And last but not least, with the very inviting background, we've got Ildiko Tabori. She was with us when we first discussed the Lyle and Eric Menendez case. She was featured in a documentary about it. She received her PhD in clinical psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology at Los Angeles in 2003 and has been a practicing licensed psychologist and neuropsychologist since 2004. And welcome to one and all. And Wendy, I know you missed a little bit off the introduction, but you're with two prominent women. Dr. Ildiko Tabori is a psychologist, and Barbara Rae-Venter, I have dubbed her, which is the truth, the godmother of genetic genealogy, investigative genetic genealogy. She helped she helped solve the Golden State Killer.
Thank you.
Yes, he does deserve a big thank you. So, a couple of quick notes. You can follow us on Facebook, Insta, Twitter. I tweet out showtimes at podcast STS. And you can support us on Patreon and become a YouTube member. And the merch store is open if you want to get the men in your life a mug for Father's Day, if there are any fathers out there. How about that? So without further ado, let's dive into this case. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. I've heard it 10 different ways. So we'll go with Matthew Nilo, 35. He was in court today. He pleaded not guilty. He is now a New Jersey lawyer, but went to school in Boston, accused of sexually assaulting 4 women in Charlestown in 2007 and 2008. Pleaded not guilty on Monday, ordered held on $500,000 bail. To you, the lawyer, Wendy Murphy, first of all, tell the audience what kind of neighborhood is Charlestown? You're a lifelong Bostonian. And are you surprised at the bail amount, $500,000? He might get out. They said if he does get out, he'll be required to be in an ankle monitor. So what say you about these proceedings today?
Yeah, so many interesting developments. On the one hand, 500,000 sounds like because he's a lawyer, he probably has the means to get that money together, and that means he would be able to get out. But it's not nothing. I mean, 500 grand is a lot of money. And the point of bail, of course, as we know, is to make sure the person returns. So I don't care if he's a lawyer or anything else. Very few people would willingly just give up $500,000. So I think it's a good amount. I think it's an amount that will make sure he keeps showing up. He's also facing the loss of his lawyer's license. So he wants to be acquitted. Otherwise, his life is basically over anyway in terms of what he's been doing in his career. So the 500,000 I thought was okay. The nature of the crimes and the fact that they happened a long time ago, I think, led some people to believe that maybe the judge wouldn't have put too much bail on him, because the suggestion would be that these cases might be weak because they're old. So I was heartened by how much bail there was, because it made me think the prosecution's case is really strong. If the defense had an argument that this was just a bunch of old cases and consent defense was going to work and these were just girlfriends who got angry with him or something, you didn't get that feeling. I mean, that just is not this kind of case. And so I was glad to hear that there was a sense in the courtroom that this is not a case where this guy's going to walk free. That's my feeling, that the evidence seems quite strong, even though we haven't heard all the details yet. As for what kind of place Charlestown is, at this point in time, it is an extremely expensive place to live. As the sections of Boston go, it's considered a fairly high-end place to live. It wasn't as expensive 15 years ago when these offenses happened. And I'm not sure that makes much of a difference. What I can say is that this would not be considered a high crime area even back then. So it is the sort of neighborhood where if there's a serial rapist running around, the neighborhood would be up in arms about it. There'd be a lot of outrage, and the community would be saying, this doesn't happen here. I mean, everybody sort of says that, but as high crime areas go, and I think he's also either under suspicion for, and hasn't yet been tied to, but some other incidents in a nearby section of Boston called the North End, known as the Italian section, not too far from Charlestown, in fact. So we'll see what comes of this. Right now, he's known as a charged serial rapist for 3 completed rapes, 1 attempted rape. There could still be more charges in this case, depending on what we find out about the testing that's still going to be done on the other unsolved cases that he's been suspected of.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because authorities are asking any women out there who may have been assaulted more than a decade ago, 15 plus years ago, to please come forward. They think that he could, in fact, be tied to other cases. We're going to save the godmother for last today. So next to Dr. Ildiko Tabori. To you, you said, you started kind of following the case after we flagged you on it. You look at a photo of this guy, and this sort of reminded me of this Utah mom. By the way, we have her attorney not discussing that case tomorrow, but discussing Lori Vallow. But the Utah mom, Corey Richins, who's accused of poisoning her husband using 5 times the lethal amount of fentanyl. You look at her, and she's kind of pretty and meek looking. She doesn't stand out. And this guy, Ildiko, is a handsome fellow, very clean cut, went to a prominent high school, Boston Latin in Boston, went to a very good college, University of Wisconsin. You can't really judge a book by its cover, can you, if he's in fact involved in these crimes?
Oh, no, not at all. But I think that's why this case is getting so much attention. Not that it was just a serial rapist, but that he's so young and he's so pretty. I mean, he is a handsome dude. And when these were committed, he was 18, 19, barely 20 years old. I mean, and this likely was when he got started. And I'm sure there's other rapes out there, given the severity of these cases, assuming that he did it. So yeah, it's getting that attention, and it struck me just how cute this kid is. He's just adorable, and he's got this adorable little brand new fiance, which is really, really sad.
Wendy Murphy would smack this guy if she could. On to the godmother, Barbara Rae-Venter. So authorities, again, this happened back in the years 2007, 2008. You do the math, it's about 15 years ago. Investigators say that advances in investigative genetic genealogy and DNA testing helped solve the case. They revisited the investigation in the 4 assaults using forensic investigative genetic genealogy that resulted in Matthew Nilo becoming a person of interest. Can you kind of pull the curtain back here into your world, Barbara, and tell us what was going on behind the scenes with piecing this together to get to the conclusion that he may be responsible?
Sure. I don't have any personal knowledge of what was done in terms of the science in this case, but I can tell you sort of the general procedure that is used for investigative genetic genealogy. So what you do is you take your crime scene sample, you obtain a DNA extract from that, and then what you do is you upload it to one of two databases, one that's called GEDmatch and another one which is Family Tree DNA, which is a site that's run by Gene. So once you've uploaded it, what you then get is a list of people who share DNA with your crime scene person. And so what you do then is you build out family trees for those people. Once you've built out the family trees, what you're looking for is common ancestors, because what you know is that these folks all share DNA. And since they share DNA, if you can identify who their common ancestor is, then what you know is the person you're trying to identify must be a descendant of that common ancestor. So the next thing you do is you turn around and you now build what we call a reverse family tree. You identify all the descendants of that common ancestor. Amongst those descendants is the guy you want. So what you've done to start out is you've done yourself a little profile of who you're looking for. So in this case, we're obviously looking for somebody who lives in Boston, possibly even lives in is it Charlestown, where the rapes have occurred. You know he was about 18 or 19 years old at the time, or at least you're going to guess that he's going to be at least that old to have committed the crime. And so you use that information then, and you apply that to your list of descendants. And you come up with a little list of suspects. From there, what you do is, you try to zoom in on other things that you might know about the person. Maybe since there was somebody who was only an attempted rape, maybe they have a description of the person, maybe a sketch. And so they can then start applying that information to the list of people that they have. So at that point, they're probably down to just a couple of folks. What you then do is you do a surreptitious DNA sample on the people that you have as your suspect list. And once you've done that, typically, assuming that you did everything right, you're going to have somebody come back with a gazillion to one odds that it can be anybody else. And in this case, it's going to be Nilo. So then you already know who your person is. I mean, there's very little, unless he's got an identical twin, you've got your guy. And so that's at that point, they then can use that as the basis of an arrest warrant and a search warrant. And typically, once they've arrested him, they'll actually do another DNA sample to make sure they got the right guy. And that's where you are.
The probability I saw, and I'll look for the number in a minute, and I'll circle back to you, wasn't quite as high as I thought, and I'll ask you about that. But before we get there, to you, Dr. Tabori, it's interesting. You mentioned that this is why you think the case is partly generating so much interest, because he was also just newly engaged a few weeks ago. The fiance is attractive. He's attractive, very clean cut looking. She was in court today, clutching rosary beads with a cross attached, her face reportedly expressionless. She declined to comment before leaving. This whole dynamic of this clean-cut guy with a fiance devoted to him by his side, is that going to raise, in your opinion, the profile of this case overall and pique the interest of the general public more so than if this was some greasy, slimy-looking guy with face tattoos, let's say?
Oh yeah, it's going to raise it. You got an attractive, couple here, and we like looking at pretty people on TV, right? We like looking at pretty people, in true crime. It makes it more interesting. Let's go back to Ted Bundy, who was a very attractive man, and we sucked it all up. And now you throw in this pretty fiance who, she don't have a blank stare. To me, she looked like she had a deer in the headlights with a rosary. I mean, what's going to happen there? And I'm sure she wasn't expecting this one. Yeah, it's going to raise the profile by a lot.
Well, imagine
come on. The rosary wasn't a direction from the PR team. Make her come with rosaries in her hand was probably the first thing the lawyer said, among other things. Come on. This is all for the potential jury, right? That the jury's thinking about. We're all the potential jury here in Massachusetts. So we watch this on the news and we think, oh, what kind of a person is she? And as you said, what kind of a person is he? They don't look like bad people. He looks like my next door neighbor, my son. He's Dream Date Ken. Dream Date Ken doesn't rape Barbie. I mean, this is what's so great about it from the theatrics perspective. It's a really good defense case because they can stand up and say to the jury, look at them, look at him. Does he look like a rapist? And that's a big point in their direction. Unfortunately, evidence, thankfully, when it's forensic and especially when it's DNA, can override that in a heartbeat. And then once the jury gets there, once the jury looks at him and says, I do think you're the one who did it, then they become vindictive and vicious. Then they're like, oh, then they come after him with all guns blazing. But there is that presumption of a feel-good, almost thumb on the scale in his favor until they hear the evidence, just because of what he looks like and because of what the girlfriend's doing and the whole God thing with the rosary beads. I mean, I hope the jury is smart enough when the time comes. If she sits in the back of the courtroom with the beads at that point, I hope the jury finds him extra guilty because they're trying to manipulate the jury.
Wendy, have you ever?
Who wants a smart jury? I mean, and there's a picture
so true.
of
You're
her
right.
hands in the rosary with her perfect gel manicure, her innocent, like clear pinkish whitish gel manicure around the rosary beads. Perfect.
Yeah,
Wendy,
and you're absolutely right that they're going to try to pick the dumbest damn jury they can get their hands on. Absolutely correct.
Wendy, have you ever directed a client to bring rosary beads into the courtroom? Wendy,
I'm not that smart. I mean, it's really it never crosses my mind to try to be that manipulative. I might say, dress respectfully. That's as rough as I get. But you still see it, and the courtroom is a theater. So I'm not saying it's necessarily improper, but I do think that, especially these days, because of since the OJ case, when we really started to watch trials on television, we've learned the tricks. So there's not a lot you can get away with these days. The question really is, how will the jury feel about manipulation? Because some of them get sucked in, they just do. And then others become cynical and they're like, well, I'm not going to ever find this guy not guilty because people are trying to manipulate me. They think I'm stupid. And, once you get a jury in that mindset where they feel defensive, like, why would you try to manipulate me? I'm trying to do my civic duty. Then you can lose badly, I should say.
And Wendy, on to the charges from your legal perspective. So he was arraigned on 3 counts of aggravated rape in Suffolk Superior Court, 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of assault with intent to rape, and 1 count of indecent assault and battery. And they already set a trial date for June 24th. But
June 24th of what year?
June of 2024. I apologize.
Yeah, and I guarantee you that will not happen. I guarantee you this case is at least 3 years out, maybe 4. That's the going rate for a case like this in Massachusetts. That the defense will file motions and motions and motions. And then once they get close to the first trial, they'll fire that lawyer and hire another one to get another 6-month delay. This case is not going to be heard by 2024.
Do you think he'll be out on bail that entire time, walking somewhat freely with an ankle monitor?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think he's the kind of guy who either by himself or with friends or family support will put that money together. And that's another reason they'll drag it out till everybody drops dead. Why do we even have a right to a speedy trial? Every defendant I've ever prosecuted wanted the slowest damn trial he could get his hands on. And really, like, the Constitution actually gives accused criminals a right to a very slow trial, because that's the only thing they've ever asked for. The right to a speedy trial, in theory, is meant to make sure that the state doesn't hold anybody if they don't have the goods, right? But in reality, so few cases get charged. Those that do get charged are almost 95% are actually guilty. So those are the cases where, for the most part, unless the defense thinks they can win, which is rare, but it's possible, they want to drag it out. Because what happens? Witnesses disappear, memories fade, emotions fade. I mean, the case gets better. You know the old adage from the defense bar, a good defense, like a good wine, gets better with age. So they just want to drag these things out. It's much worse now than when I was a prosecutor in terms of how long it takes for the prosecution. And I mean this, the prosecution is usually the one demanding a speedy trial, and they don't really have a right to one. Victims do. In most states, and certainly it's true in Massachusetts, the victims have a right to a prompt disposition. And if things start to get dragged out, they can go into court with a lawyer like me, a lawyer that's a private attorney, not the prosecutor, but somebody for them. And I do this all the time. I'll go into court and file a third-party motion to protect and advance the victim's right to a prompt disposition. I did this last year in a homicide case. The case had been dragged out for over 5 years, and the family was like, what is happening? 5 years? What is going on? And the judge agreed with us and then put our case at the top of the list of priorities. So there are some things you can do. I just want to say one thing. First of all, I'm so sorry I made that noise before. I was trying to give you what I think is funny information, which is that Massachusetts today not only arraigned this lawyer, we started a trial on another rapist lawyer named Gary Zarola, who has been acquitted on 2 rapes in the past. He's now facing 2 more rape charges, and his case started today. So we're going to be known as the state where the lawyers not only pass the bar, they then go to court for rape when they, I mean, it's just embarrassing that we actually have lawyers in Massachusetts going to trial for raping lots of women. Not one, not 2. Gary Zarola's up to 4. This guy's got 4 so far. Welcome.
And Wendy, does this guy, Nilo, does he face potentially life in prison on these charges? Is it that severe?
Well, the media likes to say that, oh, this man faces life behind bars. No, there's always a going rate for rape in every state. The books might say a conviction for rape is punishable by up to life. And that's probably the case in most jurisdictions, certainly the case here. But the reality is there's a going rate, and it's what the judges tend to think a rape is worth. And when I was a prosecutor, 3 to 5 was very common. And I consider that a very, very low amount of time for such a serious crime. But we say it's a serious crime. We don't treat it like it's a serious crime. These days, I think for a single rape, if you see a guy get 5 to 7 in state prison, that would be common, maybe even a little harsh for a first offense. In one county in Massachusetts, there's a notorious prosecutor in Massachusetts who, if you get charged with rape and it's your first offense, they know that they can get it reduced to indecent assault, and they get probation in the district court with 2.5 years probation. So that's the going rate for rape in one of our counties here in Massachusetts. They don't even let it stick as a rape charge. They lower it to some misdemeanor and give you probation. That's not necessarily true in this county. And of course, with the public watching, there's a much better chance that the sentence will be longer. Plus, you've got multiple victims. I mean, assuming he's convicted of all these charges, he does face life. He won't get life, but he'll get more than he would have if he were John Q. Public.
Wow. There you go. The judicial system is just not that fair, I guess. Ildiko to you, Dr. Tabori to me. Is he still a threat, do you think? And by the way, look right here. You don't have to go any farther than Madeline Bullitt. Investigative genealogy is fascinating, but I will say I feel badly for his fiance. Already the emotions are pouring in on behalf of this couple. But do you think
she's praying? She's praying. That's why we feel badly for her.
I mean, I know you haven't, been in therapy sessions with him per se, but is he the type of personality profile, assuming this is all true, that could commit another crime while he's out potentially?
I suspect that he has, and I haven't done an in-depth personality profile, and obviously I don't know him and I can't diagnose him. But he has that look about him and that feel about him. And I think what's so fascinating about this case is that, he's, little white boy from the suburbs who is, went to good schools and had a good family and went to law school, and and he's cute. He's not suspecting, and that's why he was doing these crimes allegedly at such a young age. Look, I'm in Los Angeles. We just had Danny Masterson get convicted of rape on a second trial, right? I mean, we have pretty people. We have pretty people who are on TV who commit rapes. I mean, and nobody's suspecting it. Danny Masterson's wife, who's also an actress, is like, I can't believe it. We're devastated. Well, what about the victims? That's what we need to look at.
And can I say one quick thing? Because I mean, to me, the prettiness is an interesting issue from a public watching this whole thing unfold. But I've been doing this work for 35 years, and I know firsthand that the most significant factor that determines whether a man will rape is a sense of entitlement. So entitlement doesn't care about prettiness. A sense of entitlement comes from wealth. It comes from being raised to feel entitled. And I think people won't be surprised to hear this, but at the college level in Massachusetts and around the country, the schools with the highest rates of rape are the Ivies and the D1s, because they have disproportionately high numbers of entitled men from entitled families who expect to do what they want and get away with it. And the D1s, of course, are the athletes who've gotten away with whatever they've wanted to get, whatever they want to do, they got away with it all the way through high school. And they expect to keep doing that in college. So for me, the entitled pretty boys are far more dangerous just to look at them, because I know the research. The research tells me they are more dangerous because of their sense of entitlement, which really isn't necessarily correlated with prettiness. So it's a slightly different point, but prettiness does nothing for me. I mean, I'm like, what school do you go to? High risk. You're a high risk offender. You're more likely to offend. And people get nervous when I say that. Harvard has rapists. They're always at the top of the list. Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Yale, they are always at the top of the list of the most rapes. And that freaks people out when they hear that. But you got to know. You got to know, if you're sending your daughter into a place where there are going to be entitled men around, that's where she's at the greatest risk. It really is.
Wendy, that's good, because I'm trying to convince my 9-year-old to drop out of elementary school and start working now. I told her that education is a waste, so maybe she'll listen to me finally. Yeah.
If I could piggyback off of that too, I mean, we know notoriously that rapes and sexual assaults are underreported, and I don't know how many times I've sat with a patient of mine and said, that's rape, that's sexual assault. They're not realizing that that's what it is. So what was this guy allegedly doing in high school? I mean, this started so young. That one blows me away. But what was he doing in high school with the high school girlfriends or non-girlfriends or whoever? Those victims didn't probably go reported at all.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the details of the crimes. He does have a good pedigree. Boston Latin is a prominent high school, and he went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is a very difficult school to get into. Frankie Figs, to you, Barbara Rae-Venter. What, if anything, can one do to help with the genealogy identification process? If one is good at tracing a genealogy, can one help the professionals? I'll tell you right now, Barbara Rae-Venter is an attorney, and she helped track down the Golden State Killer, and she was doing some other stuff. And by the way, I'm sure this story is going to lead all the local Boston stations tonight, but if you go to the Boston Globe, you will see Barbara Rae-Venter interviewed inside the pages of the Boston Globe. She, again, is the expert on this. But what about this question, Barbara Rae-Venter?
Well, I love the question, Frankie. Thank you. Couple of things. With helping with the identification process, anybody who has done DNA testing, if they can take, it doesn't matter where you've tested, any of the testing companies will do, you can download that DNA profile and you can upload it to the 2 sites that we're allowed to use for forensic samples. So there are two of those, GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. In terms of actually helping professionals, as I described in the process for how we do investigative genetic genealogy, part of it is just like doing family history research. You're building out family trees. The tricky part is when you turn around and do the reverse tree build. Building back down to the present time period is much more difficult. Plus, unless you're in law enforcement, you don't really have access to a lot of information about living people. And so it can be very, very difficult to actually do the last part of trying to identify who your suspects are. So anybody who asks if they can get into doing this stuff, what I tell them is, if you've got friends or family members who are adopted, unknown parentage work is exactly the same as doing identifying suspects and unidentified human remains. And so you can get some practice doing that. But wonderful question, and thank you for letting me give a plug about GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA.
And Sarah says to you, Dr. Tabori, right up your alley, I wonder what was going on in his life at the time, back in 2007, 2008, and what that tells us. As a psychologist, are you curious to go back in time and see? There are photos, speaking of entitlement, of him in his college dorm room, literally peeing on a rug in the hallway of his dorm room, not in his room, but the hallway, which goes to, tell you a little something about his personality. He was a big drinker, partier. But are you curious to know what he was up to back in the day, Dr. Tabori?
Oh, yeah. When I was looking at those pictures too, peeing on the rug, drinking a beer, having the big drunk smile, doing, signs, whatever it was that he's doing. Part of that is, the dorm life and the college life and the frat life. And, but he does look like, a typical frat boy. But absolutely wanted to know what was going on in his life. I suspect that there are more. I honestly suspect that there are more. But yeah, it's it is about the entitlement. It's also, about anger and about power and about control. What was going on in his life? And you can't help but look. It's a lot of times people who are sexual abusers have been sexual abused themselves.
And by the way, you don't have to believe me.
I cannot agree that has anything to do with anything. The men who rape are not typically victims. The women who are raped don't hurt anybody. And I can't go there. I know you're right that it's sometimes true for some males, but because most victims are female and most females don't rape, I cringe when I hear that, because if entitlement is the problem, and it is the predominant problem in the research with which I'm familiar, that's the antithesis of suffering that gets manifested in violence and aggression. My sense of this guy is, and this is going to be a little controversial too, but I'm going to say it anyway, is not only did he do it because he felt he could get away with it, and he did, and because he got away with the first one, he did the second one, and because he got away with the second one, he did. I mean, there's really some there when it comes to guys that offend once and aren't held accountable. They're the ones who keep doing it because they know they can. And you ask rapists in prison, why did you do it? They almost invariably say, because I could. They do what they can get away with. But the number one reason I see more recently these days, perhaps it was true back then as well, because the internet was around, but it was sort of newish. But a lot of guys in college are making money because they're filming these rapes and they're uploading them and making good money. You can sell an online rape of a college girl, often if you can make sure that she's a virgin first. And it'd be interesting to find out if his victims were virgins, because that to me would suggest that he absolutely was making money selling videos. I'm not saying for sure, but, and it'd be hard to prove it because you'll never find them. But there's so much money to be made in this $1 trillion business. And college guys know, they're so busy doing their college work, they don't have time for a job. How are they going to make quick money? Sell drugs or film your rape? And again, it's a scary thing for parents to hear because they don't want to think they're sending their daughter to a school where there's an industry like this. But there is. And these are the sorts of guys. Now, it's interesting that once he started making money, he apparently stopped raping, right? So that's an interesting
or,
issue.
or maybe he didn't. We know, like, look, he wasn't well put together to begin with to be doing this at such a young age, or at any age. But, you don't all of a sudden wake up one day and go, I'm going to rape somebody. No, I mean,
well, you might if you're watching porn and learning from your friends that you can make money.
Well, I mean, we don't know. Were these being filmed? I mean, some of these were not just opportunistic. I mean, he planned these things out.
They mostly are. Most rapes are planned. People think they're not, but they absolutely, most rapes are planned. I'm just throwing it out there because it's a possibility. And we want to try to understand why guys do this. And sometimes it's just simple because they can. It really is.
I have not seen any evidence that it was documented, but maybe that'll come out. Who knows? But if you guys didn't believe me about Barbara Rae-Venter, just ask Beth Boe. Barbara, fantastic work with genetic genealogy. You are famous all the way here in Denmark. Always the best guests in STS Nation. Barbara, I wanted to get back to you. Boston police say that they got this match from one of the glasses that he was using at some sort of it was some sort of corporate event. FBI agents went and snagged a glass. And in the fourth attack, which was foiled, Wendy will love this, a woman wearing a glove at the time used her finger to poke this person's eye, and that glove was tested for DNA. This is Barbara Rae-Venter to you. This is where I was curious. It was tested for DNA, and investigators determined, there's a quote here, that his profile was 314 times more likely to belong to Matthew Nilo than to any other male in the population. That was a number that struck me as a little low, Barbara. Sometimes you'll hear like 1 in 71 billion. We heard that figure in the Alec Murdoch trial. So why is this number so low that it was 314 times more likely to be him than anyone else, or is that not a low number?
Well, it's actually not a low number, but it's a lot lower than what we're used to hearing. Because, I mean, when I said a gazillion to one, I mean, that usually is what it is. It's, as you said, it's in the trillions or whatever. But even so, that's still 314 to 1. That's still pretty high odds. I also wanted to make a comment really quickly on the statement that people who rape have been potentially been abused themselves at some point. There's actually a recent study that I saw, which was kind of interesting. Our team had solved it was a child rapist case a little while ago, and one of the things that was commented on was, well, this guy claimed at his trial that he had been abused as a child. And so there was a lot of discussion about that. And what came out of it was has been a fairly recent study looking at that and completely debunking that that's actually the case. What they did is they interviewed people who were rapists, both without polygraphs and with polygraphs. And when they did interviews, even the same people with a polygraph, the number of documented cases of people who really having been abused at some point went way down to, I want to say it was like around 10%. And that's from around 70 to 80% without the polygraph. These guys lie.
Thank you.
I think there's a caveat in there though, but we're lumping all, rape into one category, and this
was specifically looking at child rapists. Yeah.
Right. Right. And so, you have, the 18-year-old guy who had sex with his 14-year-old girlfriend. Is that right? Well, yes, legally, That's right. Right. But are they thinking?
Why the hell does he
I'm
have a
gonna go
14-year-old
rape my
girlfriend?
No, that's not what it is. And then you have like these serial rapists, and then you have, drunk guy with drunk girl at a party in the bathroom, right? I mean, we're lumping these things into one category, and that's not always the case. So we have to kind of differentiate these things and look at them on individual basis. Look, I'm not excusing, a history of sexual abuse growing up, to now become a rapist, because there are plenty of people who've been abused as kids who don't assault other people, who don't rape other people, but there are a lot who do.
The Betty Boop, that's what it is. My eyes are going. Statute of Limitations, Wendy Murphy. Anything to that? By the way, Tilo is a regular on the show. From Boston, and she says, I want Wendy to adopt me. So you might have another child soon. Even though Tilo's, I think, in her 40s, if I had to guess, she'll probably get mad at me, maybe 30s. I don't know.
I'll do it.
But anyway, statute of limitations, any concern there?
Yeah, I was just checking again, because the law changes on this fairly frequently, state to state. There's always some bill to extend it because not too long ago, most states had really short statutes of limitation on rape. And over the course of time, almost all states have extended them, and they just keep getting extended. Some states have no limitation period at all. Massachusetts does. It's now 15 years for an adult victim. It's, I think, 35 years if it's a child victim. So that's the good news. And that's on the criminal side. The civil side is a little bit different. But on the criminal side, with 15 years as the adult victim standard, the one caveat there is the statute doesn't begin to run until the victim is 18 or it gets reported to law enforcement. So I don't know if we know the ages of all the victims, if there were any that were over 16, which is the age of consent, but under 18. So we could have a little extra time there. But what's interesting is if it's 15 years, and that's what I think it is, we're close. This is close, and that could be part of why everything got filed when it did. They could be coming up on the expiration of the 15-year period, at least for, what year is this? 7 to 15? Yeah, at least for the oldest of the cases.
Actually, if I can make a quick comment,
sure.
What is being done now fairly frequently is to indict using the DNA, because it is a definite identification. And a lot of the cases that I'm working on right now, they've all been indicted as John Doe's.
I love that.
Barbara,
might have been done in this case.
How often are you being approached by law enforcement authorities to get your expertise on this? Is it a daily thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently working on about 50 cases.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, we have, there's no shortage of cases for doing IgG.
Wow. Well, Wendy might want you to adopt her, because she's out to get these suspects here, these alleged suspects. Sally Vella.
By the way, can I just say very quickly, I have done exactly what they did in this case with civil lawsuits that are based where the underlying offense is rape, where we brought in a guy for a deposition, or I forget exactly how the order of events went, but he came into the office, the offender we were suing. We gave him a glass of water, and that's how we were able to match it to the underpants that we had. And he actually tried to challenge it. It's interesting. Not enough civil lawyers do what cops have been doing for a long time in terms of making somebody drink out of a glass, or cops will follow the bad guy while he's smoking a cigarette. And as soon as he throws it, they'll grab it, because just a tiny bit of contact with the lips gives you all the DNA you need. And lawyers on the criminal side let the cops do it all the time, but lawyers on the civil side, I think, are just starting to take advantage of the technology by tricking guys that they're trying to sue when they rape a woman and they have money that you can sue for, by getting them into a deposition or something and giving them a glass of water and doing the same. So you gotta love not just the availability of DNA and wonderful women like you, Barbara, but also the cost has gone down. When I was first a prosecutor, we didn't have DNA at all. We had, some kind of blood type with a little subparticle. I forget what we called it. And then all of a sudden DNA came around, but it was so expensive we couldn't use it. And now it's like you can go to CVS and get your own DNA test. It's incredible. And it really is not just making a difference in terms of justice for victims. It is, I think, deterring offenders, although they're also getting very clever. For example, I know of certain cases where the rapist, because they know about DNA, will bring another man's saliva or something to the rape with them and plant it at the crime scene, put it on their penis, try to contaminate the evidence, if you will. Rapists who are being investigated in prison, we have some notorious cases in Massachusetts where the cops are going to the guy who's being held with a buccal swab kit, and the guy has paid the guy in the cell next to him for some spit, and as soon as they come, he shoves the spit in his mouth, and when they swab, they get either that guy's spit or a mix that they can't do any confirmatory testing on. So just as fast as we're getting good technology, the bad guys they know exactly what to do to screw it up. So we have to stay a step ahead, and Barbara's going to be in charge.
And Barbara, last time you were on, you talked about how inexpensive it is relative to other testing methods. Do you have any, off the top of your head, do you have any statistics on that? It was a lot less expensive. I know that.
The DNA testing?
Yeah.
Well, forensic samples, it's actually a lot more expensive than just you going and doing a buccal swab. Right now, most of the companies, it's running around probably $10,000 for doing one person.
For your kind of specialized testing, not for a run-of-the-mill DNA test. I think we pay like $700 or something very inexpensive.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about forensic samples. Yeah, if you want to go do one, you can probably get a kit for $50.
Yeah, I've done mine and my daughter's, so they're not very expensive. What I'm interested in is, especially in this case, there's such a backlog of rape kits to be tested. Like, what are we? I mean, it's such a backlog for years and years and years and years, and what?
I have some data on that, and I was going to rile Wendy Murphy up with that in a little while. But the backlog has gotten better, but it's still awful, and that has actually came up. I don't know. We had a panel of women on during the Alec Murdaugh trial, and they came up, and I can't remember. Oh, you know why? Because Stephen Smith was alleged to have been raped. In that case, and that's how it came up. And there's an unbelievable backlog in the state of South Carolina. I'm going to get to that in a little bit, but Sally Vella here says, wow, 4 women and 1 male tonight. Great job, Joel. So glad to see female experts. I assume she's including this one. Mother. And then look at this one, Ned Smith, a throwback. I remember Wendy from the Clinton years used to not be able to turn on the TV without seeing Wendy Murphy. She was ubiquitous.
It was sickening.
And look at, where did Bill Clinton go to school? He went to Harvard.
Entitled.
Went to Harvard. So, Dr. Tabori and to Wendy Murphy, just to go through some of these attacks to get both your legal and psychological perspective. The first attack, court records show, according to prosecutors, when a 23-year-old woman came downtown to look for her car in the State Street area in the early morning hours after leaving a friend's house. She was approached by this man in his 20s with light olive skin and brown hair. She thought she knew him. He offered her a ride. She accepted. He drove her down to Terminal Street where they both got out, and then he proceeded to say, "Shut up or I will kill you," and said that he had a weapon on him. He allegedly raped her in a grassy area near railroad tracks. The second victim was also 23 years old. She was leaving a bar in the very same area. She entered what she thought was a livery car, but it was this guy's car. And then Matthew Nilo flashed a knife at her when he missed the address and said to basically be quiet. The third attack was a 36-year-old woman in 2008. He promised to give her money if she went down to Charlestown with him, and he drove her and then tackled her to the ground. Fourth victim gets away, but Dr. Tabori, to you, I mean, does anything about this stand out? It's sort of similar MOs, typical cowardly, threatening with either a knife or saying he has a gun. But does anything to stand out to you from the psychological perspective?
Yeah, I mean, these were premeditated. I mean, these weren't opportunistic. This was, I mean, opportunistic in terms of the victim, but he was hunting. He looked like he was hunting. And then here's where the pretty takes effect, right? This totally screams Ted Bundy to me. Totally screams Ted Bundy. You're getting in a car with somebody you don't know, but you think you know him, but he's a good looking, clean cut guy. He's not going to harm me. He's going to a good school, probably has a decent car. So yeah, I'm going to get in because he's safe. He looks safe. He feels safe. I think I know him. Maybe I saw him at a party. So I'm jumping in the car. Yeah. I don't want to blame the victim at all.
But that's the fault of the parents who didn't say, don't get in the car of a pretty boy. What is wrong with you? Right. What the hell is wrong with you? Like, if you can't teach your daughter not to get in a car, even though the guy's cute, I mean, you failed as a parent. You think you can tell your daughter who the scary people are? You're a terrible parent. That's just.
But he didn't look scary. He wasn't scary.
But if you don't teach your daughter that scary isn't a look, then you're a terrible parent. It's that simple. And by the way, the other thing these women should have been trained to do is carry a weapon. Use it. Get trained. All my daughters shoot guns. And I'm not saying anyone should shoot guns. I hate guns. Guns are terrible, awful, bad.
By the way, that's unusual for Massachusetts.
Trained to use them. All women should be trained in weaponry. It's the great equalizer.
But Wendy, in Boston... Yeah, in Boston, that's a little against the norm, isn't it? I mean, Boston is
not for people I know. Well, not for, everybody I know make sure their daughters know how to use guns. They don't get them guns. They just make them feel empowered to deal with weapons, bring a weapon with them, know how to use it if they have to. They go to self-defense. They learn to be aggressive. They are not nice. They're not trained to be nice. They don't give a damn if anybody thinks they're polite. You got to teach girls that polite is overrated. There's no essential nature of female that's kind and nice. No, just give your daughters permission to be rude instead of polite. Make sure they know how to deal with weapons so that if a guy pulls a knife out, she can grab it and use it and do what she needs to do instead of cowering like she's seen a mouse. I mean, this is one of the problems. And I'm not saying, by no means am I saying we need to go kill everybody. And what I'm saying is if men start to think that a woman might be capable of dealing with a weapon, might even be armed, maybe they won't maybe they won't rape. I mean, they do it because they can. He knew he could overwhelm and overpower them because they were not going to have weapons. They were not going to fight back. He had more power than them. You just got to, play the game in some ways and make women feel capable of prevailing in those circumstances.
And I'm right there with you. I told my daughter when she was younger, she was complaining to me about not letting her do things by herself. And I'm like, because you're too nice. Stop being nice. Be mean. Be a little meaner. I said those exact words to her.
Good job.
I'm right there with you on that one.
Lorna McKenzie reminds me of the Craigslist killer, Philip Markoff, who was a Boston medical student.
Very comparable. Yeah. So comparable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sarah, and before we get to this question, Wendy, so the fourth, back to the attacks. The fourth attack happened December 23rd, 2008, 2 nights before Christmas. She was 44, so he kept going up in age, 23, 36. Now we're at a woman, age 44. He tackles her from behind, gets a little more aggressive here, forces her to the ground, sexually assaults her. She screams. He said, "I have a gun," and then she fought him off anyway by poking his eyes. Wendy Murphy, does the way the crime is committed have any impact in the court of law? If that question makes any sense.
Well,
that maybe he's getting more bold.
Maybe. Maybe, but because jurors will use their own imaginations to construct a narrative that makes sense to them. There has to be a way that they can make sense of what they're hearing, that what he did is, not predictable, but a thing they can make sense of, because jurors want to be able to move on in life, right? By saying, we now understand what was going on, and so we can put that behind us and move on and have a better understanding of the world and better understanding of why people do these things. The comfort that jurors need when they're processing information is something we don't really talk a lot about, but it's important. Jurors need to feel a sense of reason. They can reason through and be logical, and not only because they want to be able to find somebody guilty or not guilty because it's the right result, but then they have to go on and live in the world, and they want to process information that makes them feel like they now understand this thing that they just passed judgment on. So having said that, and I'm just doing the same thing when I'm listening to you tell the story about how old they were. So he was going up in age. The first one was in the 20s, then the 30s, then the 40s. Did he have a pattern where the next one was going to be in the 50s and the one after that was going to be in the 60s? Did he have a game plan? Was this some kind of a thing? He had an obsession of some sort. Regardless, a juror who thinks he did have a pattern is going to use that to come to the conclusion that this was intentional, that he wasn't sick, that he wasn't, the wrong guy, that they didn't get the wrong guy, because they'll see that they think he acted in a way that makes sense to them. So I do think that that's something, maybe it shouldn't work to the defendant's disadvantage. Maybe it shouldn't be used against him, but you can't help it. It's what jurors do. They bring their real life experiences and needs to the process. And we're going to hear a whole lot more about whatever else he did that was similar, because we all know, and the rules of evidence are clear about this, if he had a certain MO, whether it was the location, the words he used, the use of a certain weapon, how long he took, how he held his body, how he required them to submit in certain ways. It's one of the reasons the prosecution, if there are such pattern bits and pieces of evidence that show a pattern, that's what the prosecution is going to be able to argue to the judge, allows them to keep all the cases together for trial. And make no mistake, if all these cases get tried together, he's doomed, because a weakness in one of the cases is made up for in the next case, which is stronger. And, at some point the jury's going to say, he can't be innocent of all this stuff. And because they're all together, he must be guilty of all these things. Defendants' lawyers hate cases with multiple victims that occurred over a course of time, because they can't get over that impression the jury will have that they might forgive one offense. They're not going to forgive all of this stuff. And they're just going to say, there's no way he's not guilty, because there's so many different incidents. So the prosecution is going to work just as hard to make sure these cases stay together. But we will see a defense motion in this case trying to sever these cases and arguing that they're nothing alike. They have absolutely nothing to do with each other.
Wendy, before the state brings these charges, which they did today, would they have logically gone to these victims and said, are you willing to testify if this goes to trial? Was that already agreed upon before this arraignment today?
Yeah, all prosecutors will confirm a victim's willingness to participate before they file. But, I sometimes have a problem with prosecutors doing that, because things happen. So a charge gets filed, a guy with a lot of money starts throwing cash around, or, tries to file, maybe there's some kind of a civil offer of settlement. This would happen in the Kobe Bryant case. He gets charged criminally, and at the last minute, this civil case gets filed. He gives her $10 million, and the criminal case goes south. To me, that's corruption. That's outright corruption. But it resolved all the cases, and he walked free. I worry that a victim who says, I'm willing to testify, might think, but I can change my mind. And I wouldn't let them. I would never, as a prosecutor, let a victim choose not to testify. I'd say, once you make the decision to proceed, you can't change your mind. And if you do change your mind, and because I'm thinking somebody's going to pay her or threaten her, I'm going to kill you if you testify. So I don't want to indulge that. So I always say to the victim, you cannot change your mind. If you do change your mind, I'm going to summons you. And if you don't show up, I'm going to have you arrested. You have to testify. This isn't your case. This is the public's case. And this man is dangerous, and you have a civic obligation to testify. If you were the only eyewitness to a bank robbery, you would have to testify, because that's a public matter. The harm is to the public. That's true of rape cases as well. So I would say to her, you better make sure that this is something you want to do, because I'm not going to let you change your mind. It's just because I wouldn't want to expose her to all those issues of, is he going to kill me? What if he threatens me? Is he going to offer me cash? I just wouldn't want any of that to muck up my case. So I feel pretty strongly about that. They did clarify with these women, they are going to testify, and they won't be allowed not to testify.
A few more things we need to get to. Sarah chiming in here. It's a good thing Barbara Rae-Venter is an IGG expert, but also a lawyer. His lawyer, of course, is implying that there is a problem with DNA being collected without consent. What are the laws concerning that? Barbara, the lawyer's name is Joseph Cataldo for Matthew Nilo. He said today, I guess either on the way into court or leaving court, that he received no indication that his search warrant was obtained before law enforcement officials collected his DNA samples. They got him off glasses and utensils, as I said, when he was at some sort of work retreat or event. And this is a quote from the lawyer. My educated guess is there are no search warrants. Obtaining DNA and analyzing it without a warrant based on probable cause, I posit that is unconstitutional. While he's acknowledged it's an emerging area in the law. Wendy,
emerging. That guy is on Fantasy Island. There's nothing emerging that makes any of this illegal. I mean, come on. That guy abandoned his spit on a glass. Once you put your spit on a glass, the Constitution is no longer in the room. You have no rights to your abandoned spit. End of discussion. The only issue that could come up is if some of the work that was done involved the government searching in a protected space and or producing or sharing government-owned material. For example, if the state is going to gather your DNA for some other purpose and then make it available for testing for another case that they're working on, they might have to get a court order for that. But this doesn't implicate any of those rules, because his DNA was abandoned. When your DNA is abandoned, people can do with it what they will. The government didn't have to do anything here. And remember, we're talking about what Barbara's doing is private. She doesn't work for the government. She's a private person working in a private company, analyzing in a private sense. So she's not an agent of the state. When you've got abandoned DNA mixed with a private company, you don't have a constitutional problem ever.
By the way, I told him you were fiery before you came on. Knightwood says, what does Wendy do to relax?
I just came from yoga. I still haven't showered.
Barbara, can you weigh in on that about this Cataldo, this lawyer, saying it's there are no search warrants, it's potentially unconstitutional? Is he just climbing up the wrong tree here?
Wendy's absolutely right. There's old case law on this, that abandoned DNA is fair game.
Fair game. So this guy's there's an issue going on. Also, Barbara Rae-Venter, we're going to get into an area here that's going to definitely fire up Wendy. Back to these rape kit, the backlogs of rape kits. This is a big problem in the country. Back in July 2021, there are apparently 6,504 in Massachusetts alone, untested sexual assault kits. As of April, the number went from 6,500 down to 2,700. They say that they're making quote unquote significant progress, but are you seeing this, Barbara Rae-Venter, across the country, that there's this massive backlog and, women who are victimized are not getting justice just because there's a lack or dearth of resources to test these kits, which is kind of crazy?
Yes, it's a very sad story. There is now, though, a lot of money that is being sent out to various agencies. A lot of these grants are coming from the Department of Justice. And what they're trying to do is to, in fact, get rid of some of this backlog. There is actually federal legislation, and I believe there's also in most states there's legislation mandating that these kits be tested. However, there is no teeth at all. So I know here in California, jurisdictions that have not, in fact, done anything about their backlog, even though they're supposed to have already done this, I think it's like 2 years ago, there are no penalties for it. And so, unfortunately, not a lot gets done unless people start screaming about it. Places like Los Angeles, they actually disposed of rape kits that had the statute of limitations had run on the cases. I mean, and there are other jurisdictions where that's also happened. It is a really horrendous problem. It's also, what Los Angeles did is also extremely short-sighted, because a lot of these guys, they're serials. And so testing even the cases where the statute had run, you still might be catching guys who are currently active. So lots of things wrong with what was done with that. We are seeing, though, a lot of effort being put into starting to do some of these cases. And, some jurisdictions are completely caught up. Others, like Boston, are making progress. And I think the more that we get cases like the Nilo case shedding light on the fact that these guys are out there, they're serials, and we can still do something about them, I'm hoping that will put more pressure on jurisdictions where they have not done much in terms of doing cases. But most jurisdictions can apply for money from the Department of Justice, and there are other groups that are also funding getting some of the backlog taken care of.
I couldn't help but wonder while you're speaking how different my life would be if my mother had your voice. I'd be a different human being. A lot calmer. She was screaming at me today. I can't imagine Barbara screaming at children.
That's the Hungarian.
Yeah, yeah. She was using many expletives rolling off her tongue today.
Takes all types.
Yes, all types. She does not discriminate when it comes to expletives. This is an interesting question, Wendy Murphy. He did not, she's saying this declaratively here, he did not just offend in Massachusetts. He was in college at Wisconsin, at law school. That's incorrect. He was at law school in San Francisco. How many other victims could he have attacked? Are they going to be looking at cold case files in these jurisdictions to see if he fits the mold potential?
Guarantee they already have. Guarantee all law enforcement have been approached. One of the problems is colleges.
Yes, they've been destroyed, right?
Well, colleges suck at, number one, telling the truth about how many rapes they have. Number two, doing anything about it. So if you, as law enforcement in Boston, go to Wisconsin to his college and say, we'd like to see if he's been accused of anything while he was in college, the college is going to say, get lost. We don't tell you anything. It's private, blah, blah, blah. And then the colleges also really very boldly just will manipulate the victim and the circumstances to stop them from reporting to outside law enforcement. So the police could have no report at all, even though he raped, 25 women on campus. He literally could have raped 25 women while in college, and there'll be no record of it either in the real world police files or in the college files. So the kind of work you need to do there is really in the media. Go to Wisconsin and put ads in the paper and say, do you know this guy, and do you have anything you want to tell us about him? Because sometimes that really is the best way to find out more about creatures like this. I have to say, because, and you're going to go crazy when I say this, but I have actually encouraged victims to gather their own evidence sometimes if they have to, either because they're not necessarily certain they want to go forward and then whatever evidence they have isn't there, but also because the gathering, you're all going to hate me for what I'm about to say, but I'm opposed to the test all the kits approach. I am just deeply, deeply opposed to this battle cry of let's test all the rape kits. Hear me out. First and foremost, when you swab a woman's vagina, you're getting everything. You're getting her DNA, you're getting her recent consensual sex partner's DNA, you're getting the DNA of the guy she had an affair with, and if she had sex with 6 goats and a llama, you're getting that too. You're getting everything. And it's going into a government file. And if the defense in a particular case is she consented, none of that matters because the guy admits to penetration. So everything in the vagina is irrelevant. And I don't want the government keeping my vaginal contents if it's irrelevant. And I certainly don't want it tested because here's what happens. And by the way, 85%, if not more, of rape cases, the defense is consent, which means 85% of rape kits are filled with irrelevant, deeply personal information about the victim's vaginal contents. 85% of rape kits. And I'm not spending my public dollars testing the contents of a rape victim's vagina for no purpose because the guy admitted penetration. Moreover, when the government has now custody of her DNA in a database, the government can use it to maybe, scope her out as to whether she's guilty of shoplifting or whatever thing she commits in the future. This happened to a woman in California last year. Her rape kit DNA from her body was in a rape kit, and they searched the DNA databases that they had access to, law enforcement did, and matched her to some DNA they found in a shoplifting case or a larceny case. That is not the government that I want. I don't want the government searching my vagina that I gave the contents to. I gave them the contents so they could do justice for the man who raped me. And now they're using it against me without my permission, by the way. So no rape victim who goes to submit to a rape kit swab has any clue that the government is now going to have a biological file of her contents, much less does she know what they might do with it in the future, including the possibility of testing all the kits for what purpose. So they can now have not only the contents, but who those contents belong to in another government file. Absolutely not. I will never support that. What I support is test the kits in every single case where the perpetrator is unknown or the perpetrator claims that he did not have any kind of sexual penetration. Those are the kits to test. And when you boil it down to those cases, because those are the cases you need to test, we can afford it. Every state can afford it. I know personally law enforcement in Massachusetts, they don't want to test all the kits, not only because it's expensive to do thousands and thousands of them, but because they know they're wasting the public's money. They're going to produce information that could be harmful to the victim. They are violating her constitutional rights without any due process, without any hearing whatsoever. She didn't agree to anybody finding out anything except, is that perpetrator's DNA in my vagina? So that's the way I want the system to work, that a woman goes in for a rape kit and she signs a document that says, I do not consent to the testing of any of the contents of this material unless and until a judge decides that a certain test should be done. And usually those tests are exclusionary. You go into court, you say, Your Honor, I'd like to test the rape kit. For what purpose? To see if the defendant's DNA is there. Fine, I'll allow that test and only that test. And you cannot tell me what else is in there about all the goats and the llamas. You can just tell me, is this defendant's DNA in there? If the answer is yes, fine. If it's no, you tell me no. I don't want to know anything else. That's the way the rape kit system should work. It would be inexpensive. It would stop violating victims' constitutionally protected privacy rights in their own sexuality and their behavior. And frankly, I think it would encourage more victims to come forward. I know victims who've said, I'm not going to the hospital so they can swab my life and put it in a government file. I'm not going. And
so how
they have every right. Look, they have every right to say no. And I'm gonna disagree with you on forcing a victim to testify and that they can't change their mind and they should be arrested. You know, victims' rights prevail over the perpetrator. Yes, I want to see these rapists in prison. I want to see them in prison for a very, very long time, but not over the victim's rights.
She doesn't have a right not to testify. There's no right.
Much
She doesn't have a right not to testify. That's just not true.
She has a right to change her mind.
No, she doesn't. That's incorrect.
Yeah, she should.
She does not.
Absolutely.
There's no law anywhere. No law anywhere gives her that right. That's just incorrect. The government decides who testifies.
Barbara, did you want to weigh in? I saw you starting to.
I did. I'm a little confused as to how you're going to get a defendant into court if there was no rape kit done.
Because she says, Johnny Jones raped me. I know him. 85% of victims know the perpetrator.
No, I don't agree with that.
That's statistically 100% true. 85% of victims know their perpetrator, and the defense is consent. The data is overwhelmingly clear. In 85% of rape cases, the defendant admits penetration and claims consent. Sometimes they say, I didn't penetrate, so she knows who it is, but he says he didn't penetrate, so you want to test those cases. But if he says he did the penetration and it was consensual, you don't need DNA. That's 85% of cases. I've been doing this for 35 years. 85% has been the number for 35 years, maybe 87 sometimes, maybe 82 sometimes. It's always between 80 and 85%, roughly. Never, ever is it more or less. That's the number of cases where the defense is consent, meaning we admit it happened, you don't need DNA. The only argument is she consented. So she could have DNA from 6 men and 12 goats. It doesn't matter. He admitted it.
I'm going to respectfully disagree. The sexual assault kits that I've been working on, there's not a single one where the victim knew the rapist.
So we don't disagree. Those are the kits I want to test. I totally agree with you. Those are the kits I want to test. And I want to test them yesterday. And I totally agree with you.
Okay, but without testing them, there wouldn't be a defendant. So you made the statement that you didn't want anybody to be testing until you got a defendant in court.
No. I'm sorry. You're right. I did imply that. No, absolutely not. I am saying that when a case gets to the point where it's in court and a judge has a role to play, there has to be a hearing before the testing. That's what I meant. I apologize. You're right. I was not clear about that.
Okay, but with the cases that we're talking about right now are 10, 20, 30, 40 years old.
Yes, so, and we should test exactly the ones you said we should test, where we don't know who the suspect is. 100% agree with you.
Okay, and all of these are cases where that is the case.
But that's not at all what's going on in the states where we're saying 3,000 rape kits are stacked up and we have to test them all. No one has a law in place that says, let's not test them all. Let's test the ones where we don't know who the suspect is, or there's been a denial even of penetration. I mean, I'll even test those. But which ones those are.
I'm thinking that the backlogged hits, most of them are from cases where, in fact, the victim did not know who the rapist was.
Nope, I 100% guarantee you 85% are from cases where the victim knew the perpetrator. 85%. I guarantee it.
I have close to 100 cases that I'm working on right now.
Because that's why you're being hired. You're doing that very important work for the cases that are being selected because we don't know who the perpetrator is. I'm talking about the stacked up kits around the country. 85% of them, the victim knows who the perpetrator is. 85%. Law enforcement agrees with me on this data, 85% across the board and in every state in this country. 85% contain irrelevant information because we know who the perpetrator is. And there's a caveat there, which is to say, sometimes they know who the perpetrator is, but we don't know whether he's going to deny penetration. But besides that, there's a tiny number where we don't know who the perpetrator is. And those are the cases we should be spending money on. Absolutely agree with you on that.
Okay, do you have a reference for these numbers? Because
yeah,
they're not.
Of course, I've written about this umpteen times. I mean, I've been fighting about this issue. I was on our very first sexual assault nurse examiner board in Massachusetts, and our state police crime lab came in to talk to us about the numbers. And I said, well, what percentage contain anything relevant? Because we don't know who the perpetrator is. And the person said less than 10%. Well, that was in the beginning. That was the very early stage. This is 30 years ago. We had less than 10% of the kits had anything meaningful or relevant in them. And now, I'm up to 15%. I'll give you 15% because I'm going by what percentage of cases is the defense consent and what percentage do we have no idea who the perpetrator is. And it's invariably 15% or less where we don't know who the guy is and we need to do the DNA testing. We need to because we have no idea who he is. It's 15%. Now, you obviously have a biased sample that you work with because you're being asked to do the work on the unknown cases. But in Massachusetts, of the thousands of kits that are stacked up, only a tiny percentage have anything relevant, and the rest all have private DNA material from the victim's vagina. She doesn't want her DNA in a government database. She didn't do anything wrong.
You're assuming that all our protected health information is protected.
No, no, I'm not. But I'm saying my vaginal contents sure as hell better be if I'm a rape victim. I'm not giving you my DNA because I was raped.
If you're going to get a pap smear, the gynecologist might not be. Yeah, like look, there's hacks on medical information, and you get a pap smear, and that's your vaginal DNA.
No crime victim gives their DNA except rape victims. It's not right. And do you know that not too many years ago, Krista Worthington, a woman, was murdered in Truro, Massachusetts, and they didn't know who the suspect was. So they asked all the men in Truro to give a DNA sample, and they did. And they found the suspect in the sweep. They did a sweep. They got hundreds of men to come forward. They found the suspect in the sweep. So the government collected all the DNA from the sweep. I'm sorry? No, they collected all the DNA from the sweep, right? So all these very nice people said, here, you can have my DNA. These men just said, here's my DNA. And they found the killer and they successfully prosecuted him. He's in prison now for life, successfully prosecuted. Then the government just kept the DNA. They just kept it. And the ACLU filed a lawsuit saying, you've got to destroy the DNA. The government isn't allowed to just keep innocent people's DNA. And it was a big scandal. How dare the government just keep innocent people's DNA? Well, what about rape victims who with nothing relevant coming out of their bodies? Why are the government keeping their DNA in a file? Why?
Well, I'm going to connect Wendy. I'll connect all three of you, but particularly Wendy and Barbara, and they can debate this further offline and share data. It's interesting. And by the way, the ACLU has come forward concerned about privacy rights. That's one of the issues, as Barbara does know, surrounding IgG. A couple more things, and then we'll wrap it up. To you, Dr. Tabori, from myself, but not really myself. Do they know the difference between right and wrong, meaning these serial rapists? Do they know that what they're doing is completely not only against the law, but morally reprehensible?
Oh, they know what they're doing is wrong. Look, we learn right and wrong before the age of 10, right? You take a 4-year-old, this is right, this is wrong. They can understand that. I mean, these are really basic things. Don't steal a candy from the kid next door. That's wrong. So the question that should be asked is, do they care? Do they care it's wrong? Nope, because I got away with it. So I'm going to keep doing it so I can keep getting away with it.
And Brianna here saying what we all know, Wendy Murphy, she's always fiery, even wearing red. So there is a federal grant, Barbara Rae-Venter, and over the past 15 months, Boston PD has arrested 6 people now accused of years-old rapes, including this guy, Nilo. It's a $2.5 million federal grant to examine unsolved cases that present the greatest threat to public safety. They're looking at 100 unsolved cases. Are we seeing this happen nationally more? Is more federal money pouring in to examine these cold cases, Barbara?
Absolutely. There's an enormous amount of money being sent out as grants to various groups. So yeah, hopefully we're going to start seeing some progress.
One thing that always trips me up, and it's just because I'm a dummy, but you keep mentioning GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. What is the delineation between that and like the 23andMe's and the Ancestry.com? Are these what you upload it to? That's where I get confused. Can you elaborate?
Sure. So there are 4 main direct-to-consumer DNA testing companies in the US. So there's Ancestry, which is the biggest, 23andMe, which is the next biggest, MyHeritage, which is next in line, and then Family Tree DNA. So you can test at any of those companies, and then you can take your file, you can download it, and this is just a DNA profile. It's not your actual DNA. And then you can upload it to a site that is called GEDmatch. And what GEDmatch is, it's a company. It does not do any testing itself. But if you say tested at 23andMe and your cousin tested at Ancestry, you can't see how the two of you share DNA because you've tested at different companies. And the companies only look at people in their own database. But if you upload to GEDmatch, you can now both look at seeing how you match each other.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
so that's what GEDmatch is. Family Tree DNA is actually one of the testing companies, but it unlike the other direct-to-consumer testing companies, it allows upload of forensic files. And so I can upload one of my forensic files there. It can be a suspect kit or it can be unidentified remains. And I can look for people who have matching DNA with that kit at Family Tree DNA as well as GEDmatch.
And I'm just looking at some of the things that Barbara discussed in this Boston Globe story that I read, as well as some others. Barbara said that the quality of DNA is good, even if it's 15 years old. You're actually now working on a 38-year-old case. So this stuff does hold up over time, right, Barbara?
So yeah, the 38-year-old was the kit that we used, or at least the DNA that we used for the Golden State Killer case. It was a little bit unusual in that particular case, it was a rape homicide, and the medical examiner, this was in Ventura County in California, he actually used to take 2 samples of DNA. It's really an unusual thing to do. And what he would do is when he had tests to run, he just used one of the kits for doing the testing. And he put the other kit in the freezer. And it wasn't until we were actually looking for DNA to try to identify who the Golden State Killer was that we contacted Ventura County to see if they had any DNA left, because we're talking about a 42-year-old cold case at that point. And of course, every few years when there was new technology became available, people would take out some of their Golden State Killer DNA and they would run it with whatever the latest test was. So Paul Holes, who was actually the detective who had been working on this case, he had 3 rapes in his county, but he'd already used all the DNA from those kits. And so we were trolling around all of the counties in California where the Golden State Killer had been active, and that was 9 counties. And finally, we found some DNA in Ventura County, and it just happened to be that it was a pristine kit that had never been opened.
Wow. So lucky.
Yeah, and
it was amazing.
To Wendy's point, not just lawyers in Boston. In Boston, last year, police said they got a DNA sample from former State Street Bank Vice President Ivan Chung, who is now charged.
That too. Yeah,
charged with raping 2 children, and 2 women at knife point between 2003 and 2006. They got it from a cigarette butt. He discarded. That guy went on to be the vice president of a big bank. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Barbara, IDG, sadly, but I guess very helpfully, is also being used now to ID murder victims too. Is that right? There's some woman named Lady of the Dunes. It was a 50-year-old case in Cape Cod. I don't know if you know about that specifically, but they just ID'd her. But they are doing that, correct, to ID the victims?
Yeah. So I've done a number of cases like that. In fact, I just did one at the end of last year. It was called the Opelika Jane Doe case. which is actually a very sad case. It was a little girl. She was, at the time, she was about 6 years old. Her skeletal remains were discovered. The bones, 15 of the bones that were discovered showed healing fractures. And on top of that, also showed evidence of malnutrition. So I was able to identify her as Amore Wiggins, really pretty little name. So, and of course, identifying a child, you often end up identifying who the perpetrator is. In this particular case, we identified who the father was. He's a guy called Lamar Vickerstaff. And so Lamar was from Opelika, Alabama, which is where the little girl was found. But he had been stationed in the Navy. He was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. And so when we were trying to figure out who the mother was, we figured that probably she had, given the time that the little girl would have been conceived, we figured it was probably in Norfolk, Virginia. So we then turned our attention to Norfolk, and we found a woman who lived in apartment 1 of an apartment building, and Lamar lived in apartment 9. And so we did a little DNA testing on her, and sure enough, she was the mom. What was disturbing about this case is, so when the detectives then approached the mom about her daughter, it turns out that she had actually been paying Lamar Vickerstaff up until the current day $400 a month in child support. The little girl was killed 10 years ago.
What?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Wow.
So yeah, so they're disturbing cases to work on, the unidentified remains cases.
Wow. Well, on that disturbing note, I want to thank Dr. Ildiko Tabori. We came to know her discussing the Menendez brothers trial. By the way, Wendy, quickly, do you think the Menendez brothers should be released from prison at this point?
Yes, there should be a parade in their honor.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, look at that. Okay,
No,
we're going to have you on.
That is the worst case of injustice. Just because they weren't allowed to explain in the second trial how they were sexually abused all those years, that's worse than no DNA test from 30 years ago. It's just, what is that? That's grotesque. I wish I could do something to support their efforts to get out. I don't know if anyone's soliciting signatories to amicus briefs or whatever, but I would really like to help with that. They should absolutely be out.
You need to call your friend Mark Garagos. He's spearheading all that.
We've debated 1,000 times.
Dr. Tabori, if you had to guess right now, this guy Nilo, is he sitting in jail? Is he remorseful, or is he feeling sorry for himself more so than the victims?
Oh, I'm sure he's feeling sorry for himself. You know, this is a guy going back to the entitlement. He's entitled. That's how he functions in the world. Why me? Look, I'm being railroaded. I didn't do this. There's something wrong with the DNA. I'm sure they're going to try to find some loophole. They're already starting to. He's not feeling any remorse. Not right now.
Elaine Holograms says, ha ha ha, they're passionate about the issues, and I love that. That is an understatement, but I love that too. Wendy Murphy, she serves as adjunct professor of sexual violence law at New England Law in Boston, where she also co-directs the Women and Children's Advocacy Project under the Center of Law and Social Responsibility. She was once a visiting scholar where Bill Clinton went to law school, Harvard. And she's prosecuted child abuse and sex crimes for many years, and she is as sharp and passionate as they come. Wendy, what can we expect moving forward with this case? Do you really believe it's going to be upwards of 3 years or so till justice is potentially served?
Yeah, I mean, today was the big explosive arraignment where we hear some facts, and it's day one of the case. Now the defense will do everything in its power to keep it out of the news and on the slow track. That's the frustrating part. I think the only thing we're going to hear between now and when this case gets to trial that will be important and potentially even helpful to the case is if they match his DNA with other victims in other jurisdictions. I think we all agree that that's probably going to happen. And I hate to say it, I hope it happens, not because I hope he has more victims, but because I think it's the only way he'll end up behind bars for any extended period of time, which is where he ought to be. My regret, by the way, is that he's being prosecuted in Massachusetts. I mean, we are the most rapist-friendly state in the nation. It's embarrassing. They move here. Rapists move here because they know they're not going to get punished if they do it. I would really like to see him sent to Wisconsin to face trial there, because they're probably more likely to throw the book at him. Just a plug. Don't come here to Massachusetts if you're looking to be safe.
And what's scary is Boston has something like, at one point, 259,000 college students. So it's like a playground for rapists, which is
good.
It's horrible.
You said it. I didn't say that. You said that.
I did. Well, I said it.
I support it. I didn't say it.
Correct. Barbara Rae-Venter, she is the godmother of Investigative Genetic Genealogy. And mark my words, you'll see her on TV in the next couple of days, and they'll introduce her as the godmother because they'll steal it from me, because these guys have no originality. So Barbara knows that I said it first. Anyway, in 2019, she was included in the Time 100 list of most influential people, and in 2018 was recognized in Nature's 10, a list of people who mattered in science by the journal Nature. She's also the author of I Know Who You Are, How an Amateur DNA Sleuth Unmasked the Golden State Killer and Changed Crime Fighting forever. Barbara, in this particular case, once they have this profile, I know there's no such thing as a slam dunk case, but is there anything stronger in a court of law to prove someone's guilt than a profile that comes close to matching the suspect?
Well, in this case, it's more than coming close. It is identical with the crime scene DNA. And as you said, it was 314 times less likely that it could be anybody else. So, yeah.
Except we have snazzy lawyers.
And Barbara, dumb question to end with. How problematic is this for criminals moving forward, the advancement of IGG?
It's a real problem for them because, it's assuming that there's no contamination of the crime scene, then it's very, very difficult to other than, saying that it was consensual. And of course, in these kinds of situations, particularly as Wendy indicated, if you've got a pattern of somebody at knife point or at gunpoint raping people, it becomes less and less believable that it was consensual sex. So I think it's going to be very difficult, particularly for folks where there's more than one case, for them to overcome the DNA results.
And now you know why we have the best guests in true crime. You just witnessed it firsthand. A quick programming note: tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern time, we're diving back into the super crazy with Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell to discuss what's ahead for both of them. And we've got a new guest coming on named Lance Leasing, a former FBI agent. Ryan Phillippe, the actor, just played him in a movie called American Murderer. He's based in Phoenix. The guy is as much of a badass as one can be. Ran their entire SWAT unit for many, many years. He's coming on to talk that case with Gigi McKelvey of Pretty Lies and Alibis. And who's the other person? Anyway, another great guest. I'm fried right now. Until then, love you, America. Great to see you. Love you, California, where two of the guests are. And love you, Boston. Until next time. Thank you, everyone. If you guys want to stick around 1 sec.